Hi, and welcome to True Crime Echoes, where the past still whispers and the crimes we thought we understood. Take on new meaning. Today's story isn't just about murder, it's about betrayal, it's about manipulation, and it's about the terrifying reality that sometimes evil doesn't hide in the shadows. Sometimes it smiles at you, holds your hand, sleeps beside you. This is the story of Bernardo and Karla Homolka, the couple who shocked an entire nation. To the world, they were the perfect match, beautiful, young in love. But behind closed doors, they were orchestrating crimes so disturbing, so cruel, they would haunt Canada for decades. Teenage girls vanished, tapes were discovered, a deal was made, and justice might never have been served. In this episode, we'll walk through the chilling events that led to the deaths of Tammy Homolka, Leslie Mahaffey, and Kristen French, and how the truth unraveled piece by piece until it was too late to undo the damage. So, take a deep breath, turn off the lights, and get ready to hear a story that's not just unforgettable, it's unforgivable. This is the case of Canada's Ken and Barbie Killers, and you're about to hear it all. Chapter 1. Introduction and Case Overview. I hesitated for a long time before deciding to make this video because I knew that once I started, there would be no turning back. And if you've ever heard the names Bernardo and Karla Homolka, then you probably already know. This isn't a story for the faint of heart. To be honest, the first time I read about this case, I thought I understood it completely, that this was just a story of a serial killer couple. But it turns out, the truth goes much deeper than that, and twisted in the literal sense of the word. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome to True Crime Echoes, where I retell real-life cases with raw honesty, and sometimes with anger emotion. Just the way regular people like us would naturally react. Today, I want to tell you the story of a couple that seemed picture-perfect, beautiful, successful, adored by their families, admired by friends. A couple the media dubbed the Ken and Barbie Killers. But behind that glossy facade were dark secrets that even their closest loved ones could never have imagined. A relationship that began with charm and ended in crimes so horrifying they shook the entire nation of Canada. This story has everything: love, obsession, manipulation, rape, murder, betrayal, and an ending that to this day continues to stir public outrage. Before I dive into the details of the case, I just want to say one thing. The content in this video is extremely heavy, especially as it involves sexual assault, underage victims, and murder. If those topics make you uncomfortable, I completely understand if you choose to stop here. But if you're still with me, then let's begin. Chapter 2. When Karla Met Paul, Love, or Catastrophe. As time passed, the relationship between Paul and Karla grew surprisingly intense. Though they had only just met, they behaved like a long-term couple deeply bonded. Paul would regularly drive over 80 miles to visit Karla in St. Catherine's, a gesture that convinced her he truly loved her. To the Homolka family, Paul quickly became something of a golden boy. Mr. and Mrs. Homolka adored him so much that they frequently invited him over for dinner, treating him like an official member of the family. Most notably, Karla's youngest sister, Tammy, who was only 15 years old at the time, saw Paul as a big brother, close, warm, and trustworthy. Everyone thought Karla was incredibly lucky. A 17-year-old girl, beautiful, smart, and now dating a seemingly perfect boyfriend with good looks and a promising career. But behind that perfect image, subtle warning signs had already started to emerge. Karla told her friends that Paul could be quite jealous at times, even controlling. He wanted to know where she went, who she was with, and what she was doing. At first, Karla thought it was romantic that he loved her so much he just couldn't help but worry. But soon, the sweet possessiveness turned into outbursts, harsh words, random bursts of anger. After each episode, Paul would apologize with gifts, with flowers, with sweet letters that melted Karla's heart. And Karla, blindly in love, always forgave him. What she didn't realize was that this was the classic cycle of an abuser hurt, then soothed just enough to keep the victim under control. But to be fair, Paul was incredibly good at hiding it. To his friends, he was charming, funny, the life of the party. To Karla's family, he was a man with a bright future. Only Karla had started to feel deep down that she was sometimes afraid of him. But she kept convincing herself that all relationships had their struggles. What Karla didn't know, or more accurately, didn't want to believe, was that Paul had already begun living a double life. On one hand, he was the perfect boyfriend her family adored. But on the other hand, in Scarborough, Toronto, a serial sexual predator had begun terrorizing the city, and slowly, those two worlds were about to collide. Chapter 3: The Scarborough Rapist. A Phantom in the Night. Starting in 1988. Scarborough, a quiet suburban area in Toronto, was shaken by a string of sexual assaults. The public only knew the attacker by the name coined by the media, the Scarborough Rapist. At first, the incident seemed relatively mild cases of groping or inappropriate advances in secluded places. But over time, the level of violence escalated. Women were attacked just after stepping off evening buses or while jogging in local parks. The assailant would strike from behind, overpower his victims, drag them into dark, hidden spots, and rape them. Many were beaten so viciously, they suffered serious physical trauma. Within just 1 year at least, 11 assaults had been reported. Local television stations aired constant warnings urging women not to go out alone at night. The fear was so widespread that women working late shifts had to rely on friends or family to escort them. Mothers feared for their daughters. The entire city was gripped by anxiety. The Toronto police poured significant resources into the case. They interviewed hundreds of suspects, collected hundreds of DNA samples. They even enlisted the help of the FBI to develop a psychological profile of the perpetrator. According to the investigation, he was intelligent, young, decent-looking, well-educated, and, notably, had a history of violent behavior toward women. Sound familiar? That's right. Every detail of that profile matched Paul Bernardo. But at the time, no one imagined that the perfect boyfriend adored by the Homolka family could be the same predator terrifying an entire city. What's chilling is that by the time Paul began dating Karla in late 1987, 3 attacks had already been reported. And over the next few years, as their relationship grew more passionate, Paul continued quietly stalking women at night, extending his trail of violence. Looking back, it's bone-chilling. By day, Paul played the role of the perfect boyfriend, bringing flowers, giving gifts, whispering sweet nothings. By night, he became a phantom lurking in the shadows, spreading terror among innocent women. And Karla. She had no idea. In her eyes, Paul was tender, romantic, and loved her so much he couldn't possibly do anything wrong. Her family felt the same. They were completely blind to his true nature. By 1990, police finally released a composite sketch of the Scarborough Rapist. When it hit the front pages of local newspapers, Paul's friends were stunned. Some said, "Wait a second, that looks a lot like Paul." In fact, one of his closest friends even called Toronto police to report that the sketch bore an uncanny resemblance to Paul Bernardo. As a result, Paul was placed under suspicion and asked to provide a DNA sample. He agreed, acting so confident and cooperative that it threw everyone off. That sample was then stored away, placed in a queue for testing a deadly delay. Because during that waiting period, Paul remained free and continued his crimes. Looking back, many people feel a deep sense of helplessness. If only that DNA had been processed faster, so many lives might have been saved. But unfortunately, forensic technology at the time was slow, and that very delay gave Paul more time to descend further into darkness. Meanwhile, Karla continued to boast to her friends about her wonderful romantic boyfriend, a man who'd drive hundreds of kilometers just to see her. Her family still saw Paul as a source of pride. None of them knew that while they were sitting around the dinner table with him, he might have just returned from a brutal assault in Scarborough. And then, when Paul eventually moved in with the Homolka family, the horror would no longer be confined to strangers. It would begin to seep into their own home. Chapter 4: Tammy's Death. The First Crime Within the Family. What haunts me the most is the reaction of the Homolka family after Tammy's death. They were devastated. They grieved. But not once did they suspect Paul or Karla. To them, it was simply a heartbreaking accident, a curious teenage girl who drank too much and tragically lost her life. Karla's parents even hugged Paul afterward, thanking him for trying to save Tammy. Can you believe that the man who directly caused her death was comforted? He was seen as a helpless hero, and Karla, she cried. She acted shattered like any older sister would, but deep down she knew everything. If there was any pain at all, it wasn't for Tammy. It was fear. Fear that the secret would come out. Fear that her twisted love affair with Paul would fall apart. And then comes the most chilling part. Barely a month after Tammy's death, Karla and Paul moved out to live on their own. They bought a small house in Port Dalhousie. On the surface, it seemed like a normal step for a young couple in love, but in reality, it marked the beginning of something much darker. In that new home, Paul began showing his true self openly. He was no longer the charming boyfriend or romantic fiancé. He became violent verbally, physically, brutally. First came the yelling, then came the punches, the kicks. Eventually, the beatings turned savage. Karla was terrified, but she stayed, because Paul knew exactly how to control her. After every assault, he would threaten her. He would say things like, "If you leave me, I'll tell them everything about Tammy. I'll take the tapes to the police. You think you can walk away?" And with just those words, Karla fell silent. She knew she was already complicit, and now she was trapped chained to Paul by the very crime they had committed together. So instead of leaving him, Karla stayed. She became his accomplice reluctantly, or maybe even willingly, in the horrors that followed. Because after Tammy's death, something inside Karla broke. Her moral boundaries collapsed. Once she crossed that first line and wasn't punished for it, everything else became easier. What truly sends chills down my spine is this. Right after Tammy's funeral, Paul and Karla were already discussing their wedding. They smiled, they took pictures, they planned their future as if nothing had happened. That was the moment I realized Tammy's punishment wasn't just death. Her true tragedy was being betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love her the most. Tammy's death should have been a wake-up call. But instead, it became a stepping stone. A test that Paul and Karla passed. Because they killed someone inside the family and got away with it. And once they realized that, they believed they could do anything and go on living as if nothing ever happened. But this time, the next victims wouldn't be family. They would be young girls out there, innocent and unaware. And the first of them was Leslie Mahaffey, just 14 years old. Chapter 5, The Wedding and the Lake. I still remember that day, June 29th, 1991. It should have been a beautiful day, the kind of memory that lasts a lifetime. That's when Paul and I had our wedding. A lovely ceremony, over 100 guests, everyone smiling, clapping, congratulating us like we were some fairy tale couple. But no one, not a single soul at that wedding, knew the horrifying truth just a few weeks before Paul had brought home a 14-year-old girl named Leslie Mahaffey. And now she was dead. Paul had seen Leslie standing in her backyard. He lured her to the car by offering a cigarette. That cigarette was in the car, he said. She got in. She never came out. We kept her in our home for hours. He tied her up and we took turns assaulting her. And yes, it was all recorded. Paul insisted on filming everything. When he was done, when he had satisfied whatever cruel desire he carried inside him, he strangled her. Just like that. No emotion, no hesitation. We dismembered her body with a circular saw and mixed her remains with cement. Then we dumped her in Lake Gibson, pieces of her floating in silence beneath the surface. And here's the part that still haunts me, the part that makes me sick. On the very same day we were exchanging vows, a fisherman found some of those cement blocks containing Leslie's body. While I was smiling for the camera, kissing Paul, celebrating our future, her remains were being pulled from the lake. 2 lives, 2 realities. One dressed in white, one drowned in silence. The town was in shock. The media exploded. Police had no suspects. There were no clues. But I knew. I knew everything. And I said nothing. Chapter 6. When Karla was beaten. The thin line between victim and accomplice. For a long time, I convinced myself that what I did was for love. I thought that if I kept Paul happy, if I brought girls home, if I followed his fantasies, if I smiled through it all, he wouldn't hurt me. That he would stay with me, that I could control him. But Paul Bernardo wasn't someone you could control. He was a storm, and eventually that storm turned on me. It started slowly, the shouting, the jealousy, the cruel words. But by early 1993, the violence was no longer subtle. Paul was hitting me, regularly, violently, no more apologies, no more flowers afterward, just his fists, and my silence. Then came the breaking point. In January 1993, he beat me so badly I ended up in the hospital. My face was bruised, my ribs were cracked, my eyes were swollen shut. And when the doctors asked what happened, I lied. Of course I lied. I told them I had a car accident. Because the truth was worse, and I didn't know how to escape it. But something inside me shifted that day. Lying in that hospital bed, barely able to breathe, I realized if I stayed with Paul, I was going to die. And right around then, the police were closing in. See, Paul had been a suspect in a string of unsolved rapes back in Scarborough attacks that had terrified women for years. He was called the Scarborough Rapist, and police had taken his DNA back in 1990, but the backlog was huge. It took almost 3 years to process. And when they finally got the results in February 1993, it matched. Paul Bernardo was the Scarborough Rapist. That changed everything. But instead of arresting him right away, investigators made a different move. They came to me. Maybe they saw the bruises. Maybe they sensed I was ready to crack. Maybe they thought I had just enough left in me to talk. And they were right. At first I thought they were just asking about the abuse, about Paul hitting me. But when they started mentioning Kristen and Leslie and Tammy, I knew they knew. And for the first time I talked. I told them everything. How Paul had raped my sister, how we drugged her, how she died, how we kidnapped Leslie, how we filmed Kristen, how we laughed. But the only reason I talked truly was because I was offered a deal. In exchange for full cooperation and testifying against Paul, I would be given a reduced sentence, just 12 years for manslaughter and criminal negligence. Not murder, not rape, not life in prison, just 12 years. At the time, prosecutors thought they were doing the right thing. They hadn't seen the tapes yet. They only had my word. And they needed to bring Paul down. So they signed the deal. But when the tapes were found later and they finally watched them, people saw something else entirely. They didn't see a woman forced to participate. They didn't see a victim begging for mercy. They saw me smiling, engaging, sometimes even giving instructions. I wasn't just along for the ride. I was in the passenger seat, reading the map. And that's when the world turned on me. They called it the deal with the devil. The press tore me apart. The public was outraged. The families of the victims were furious, because even if I had been abused, even if Paul had hurt me, I had still helped him kill. And for that 12 years never felt like enough. But the papers were signed, the deal was done, and all that was left was to put Paul on trial and let the world see the truth. Chapter 7. The Trial of Paul Bernardo. When the tapes were discovered, everything exploded in February 1993. After I told the police everything, they arrested Paul. He didn't scream, he didn't cry, he just looked at me, cold, like I had betrayed him. Maybe I had, but Paul Bernardo was no longer just my secret. He was now Canada's nightmare. At first, people only had my words to go on, my statements, my interviews, but what the investigators really needed were the tapes. Because without those tapes, it was still my word against his. Then during a second search of our house hidden behind the ceiling light fixture in the upstairs bathroom, they found them. Several VHS tapes, each one labeled, each one unforgettable. Police watched them, lawyers watched them, and even though the public never saw them, trust me, they didn't need to. The descriptions alone made people sick. On the tapes, Paul and I were filming ourselves raping Kristen and Leslie. There were close-ups. There were moments where Paul posed for the camera. There were moments where I laughed. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like someone enjoying it, helping it, facilitating it. There was no way to deny it anymore. Suddenly that deal with the devil people whispered about became real. The public was furious. The prosecutors were stunned. But the deal was already done. They couldn't undo it. I would serve 12 years no more. Even with all the horrifying footage, I was now the star witness, not the primary criminal. But Paul was going to trial, and the whole country was watching. In May 1995, Paul Bernardo finally faced justice. 9 charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault and dismemberment. The trial lasted weeks. And though the tapes weren't shown in open court, for the sake of the jury's mental health, detailed transcripts were read aloud. I testified. I answered every question. People watched me closely, every blink, every breath, trying to decide whether I was telling the truth or performing. Some reporters cried. Some jury members had to leave the courtroom. Even the judge paused multiple times. Because what those tapes revealed wasn't just rape and murder. It was premeditated, cold, calculated, a performance of cruelty. And Paul. He sat there, expressionless, like he didn't care. And maybe he didn't. In the end, Paul Bernardo was found guilty on all charges. The court sentenced him to life in prison with no possibility of parole. He was declared a dangerous offender, one of the few legal designations in Canada that ensures you stay behind bars indefinitely. He would never be free again. But even with Paul behind bars, I was still free. And that's what tore people apart. Because when the dust settled and the tapes had been filed away and the headlines began to fade, I was packing my bags, preparing for prison. Not life. Not even 20 years. Just 12. And many people, including the families of Kristen and Leslie, believed that I deserved far more. But it was too late. No retrial. No reversal. No justice in their eyes. And when Paul went to prison, I served my time. Quietly, but not forgotten. Because Canada never forgave me. Not really. And deep down, maybe I didn't forgive myself either. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. When justice isn't enough. Paul Bernardo was sentenced to life. No parole. No chance of walking free again. And for many people, that was a relief. One less monster on the streets. But then came the question no one could escape. What about me because I didn't get life? I got 12 years. 12 years for helping Paul rape and kill 3 young girls, including my own sister. And worse than that, after 12 years, I walked out. In 2005, I was released from prison. I changed my name to Leanne Teal. I moved to Quebec. Tried to start over. I even got married to the brother of my former lawyer. And I had children. That's what really set people off. That someone like me, someone who helped take away the lives of 3 teenage girls, was now raising kids of her own. And not just raising them. There were reports that I was volunteering at their school, helping with field trips, baking cookies for fundraisers. A convicted killer, in classrooms, around children. The media went wild. Paparazzi followed me. Parents protested. People demanded I be removed. They said I was a threat. That I didn't deserve a second chance. And maybe they were right, because by then the full truth had come out. The tapes, the transcripts, the laughter, the way I looked in those videos, calm, collected, even enjoying it. People no longer saw me as a victim. They saw me as a predator, and they couldn't understand why the system had protected me. The deal I made, the one that spared me a life sentence, was signed before the tapes were discovered. Once prosecutors saw those tapes, they tried to undo the agreement, but it was too late. Legally, I couldn't be retried. I couldn't be punished more than I already had. And that's why the media called it the deal with the devil. The justice system had gambled and they bet on the wrong devil. For the families of Leslie Mahaffey, Kristen French, and Tammy Homolka, there was never any closure. I never met their eyes in court. Never apologized to them personally. How could I? What words could possibly mean anything when you've helped take someone's child away? I don't expect forgiveness. And I don't think I deserve it. But I do know this even now, decades later. When people hear my name, Karla Homolka, they still shudder. Because some crimes don't fade. Some sins leave permanent scars. Not just on victims, but on an entire country's sense of trust. Paul is still in prison today. He's been transferred between maximum security facilities. Each time the public is notified, and each time tens of thousands of people sign petitions to keep him locked up. No one wants him out. No one ever will. But me, I'm out. I walk free. I live. And for many people, that's the real injustice. So if you're listening to this right now and you feel anger, you're not alone. If you feel like justice failed, you're not wrong. Because sometimes justice is not a verdict. It's not a prison sentence. It's not a courtroom victory. Sometimes justice is just a story that still haunts us. That reminds us what monsters can look like, not always with blood and fangs, but with smiles, wedding dresses, and soft voices. May Leslie, Kristen, and Tammy never be forgotten, and may we never forget what happens when we mistake silence for innocence. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Crime Echoes. If this story stayed with you, share it. Let others know what really happened. And if you have thoughts on this case, drop them in the comments. I read everyone. See you in the next episode where we uncover the stories that justice left behind. You've just heard the story of Bernardo and Karla Homolka, one of the darkest chapters in Canadian criminal history. Paul is still in prison. Karla is free. And 3 girls, Tammy, Leslie, and Kristen, are gone forever. This case forces us to question everything. What does justice really mean? Can a victim also be a monster? And when the truth comes too late, who pays the price? Some say Karla got away with murder. Others say she was just another one of Paul's victims. But the one thing no one can deny is that she helped. And that help came with a smile, with a camera, with silence. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Crime Echoes. If this story affected you, please share it. Let these victims' names live on. And if you have thoughts, I'm listening. Drop a comment below. I read them all. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and never stop asking the hard questions. Because sometimes, justice isn't justice. It's just what's left after the truth has been buried.